Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. As always, I'm your host, Martin, and I'm happy to have you with me today. For this week's episode, my guest is Daniel Moeller, who is a comic book author and artist, and he is here to talk about his new crowdfunding campaign to produce actual physical copies of his latest comic book, Psychonaut 5. We'll be getting into all that in just a moment, but of course, first, a few announcements. First announcement is that I have an event coming up in conjunction with the Church of the Sacred Synthesis. This is happening on Thursday, November 20th. That's going to be 5 to 6 p.m. Pacific time, which is my time on the West Coast of the United States, or 7 to 8 p.m. Central time, which is Texas time. I do believe that folks who want to join are able to do so. You can stop by at thesacredsynthesis.com if you'd like more information about that. Just go to their events page and then scroll down to the Medicine Conclave discussing 5-MeO-DMT with Dr. Martin Ball. Oh, that would be me. And it's just an hour-long event, and we're going to be talking about working with 5-MeO-DMT, and I know that the Church of Sacred Synthesis, has recently gotten into working with low-dose 5-MeO-DMT, so that's probably what we're going to be talking about. We will see. Speaking of low-dose 5-MeO-DMT, another little announcement that I have is that I am currently working on editing and formatting the next book by Stephen Kirby from Mindscape Psychedelic Institute that he wrote in conjunction with his wife Amber, and it is specifically about working with low-dose 5-MeO-DMT, gradually working your way up to a full release dose over a 6-month time period, and it's called the Embodiment Protocol. And I think I'm probably going to try and bring both Stefan and Amber onto the show to talk about it. And hopefully that book and guidebook really will be available within the next couple of weeks. I'm currently designing the cover, doing all the interior formatting, that kind of stuff. And so we'll have that ready soon for the reading audience. Let's see. What else? Oh, speaking of Mindscape Institute, I'm putting this out there just a little bit ahead of time, but that's because it's going to be out there. I will be flying to Iceland in January of 2026 to work with some of the Mindscape Institute students who live over in Europe and also in Iceland. And I'm going to be giving a public talk there in Iceland. I think we have it set up for Sunday, January 18th. Of 2026. I'm not entirely certain on that date. I don't have a lot of details yet. But anyway, if you're in Iceland in January, or even if you're in Ireland or, Western Europe and you want to fly over to Iceland for a talk about 5-MeO-DMT, hey, come and do it. I get asked a lot of times by people in Europe, like, when are you going to come give a talk in Europe? And that's pretty much never. But this is the closest I'm going to get is Iceland. So that'll be in January. And let's see. Oh, speaking of dates, as I mentioned last week, my birthday is coming up. It's on November 26th. And as I do every year, I like to give away an album of my original music as sort of a reverse birthday present to anybody who wants to receive it from me to you. This year, I have a brand new album called Solar Return, and it is set to go out to digital distribution on my birthday of November 26th. So that's its official release date. It's currently up at my Bandcamp page, martinball.bandcamp.com. It's out there for $10. It's a 10-track album, 55 minutes worth of really cool music, in my opinion. I made it, so I think it's cool. But on the week of my birthday, so that'll be November 24th through November 30th, I will have that album available for free download at my Bandcamp page. So just mark it on your calendar if you want to check out and get my latest album for free. You can go to Bandcamp right now and you can stream the whole thing. I have it set so that anybody can listen. I don't mind. But if you want to download it for free during my birthday week, when prompted for payment, when you go to download it, just enter 0 into it. Asks, how much do you want to pay? And you just pay 0, and then it's yours for free. And there's definitely some big dance tracks on this album. I had a lot of fun making this album over the past few weeks. So anyway, that's coming up a little bit later this month. Of course, there will be more interviews and everything happening here on the podcast. And just looking ahead, since we are talking about birthdays, the Entheogenic Evolution podcast will turn 18 years old in January. Amazing. Can't believe I've been doing this for that long. Of course, I'm available for 30, 60, or 90-minute calls to help you integrate your entheogenic experience from a non-dual and energetic perspective. You can stop by at martinball.net for more information or non-dualentheogenicintegration.com. And of course, if you are a listener and want to support this podcast, I invite you to stop by my Patreon page at patreon.com/martinwball. There's everything from $1 a month up to $100 a month, which also gets you a 1-hour monthly video call check-in. There's no obligation. You can change your level of support anytime you want. You can cancel it. You can just sign up for free. But if you enjoy the information that comes out on this podcast, I encourage you to, sign up at the $1 a month level, the $5 a month level. And then anything $20 a month and above gets access to the Entheogenic Evolution Archive, which has many, many, many hours of talks that are no longer available here on the podcast through the active stream due to storage space limitations. And just a reminder, you can also find the Entheogenic Evolution on YouTube. That is the name of my YouTube channel. And there's not only this podcast is there and all the talks and all the interviews and all the everything, but a number of other videos and interviews and talks and more. So there's a lot of material there that you can enjoy through the Entheogenic Evolution YouTube channel. And that's about it for now. I'm going to throw in one of those new tracks at the end of the conversation with Daniel. If you want to find Daniel online, you can visit him at danielmoellerweb.com. And if you want to support the crowdfunding campaign, you can go to crowdfunder.com, and it's FUNDR, there's no E in there, crowdfunder.com/psychonaut5, and the links for Daniel's website and for the crowdfunder will be listed in the notes to the podcast episode for today. So this is a great conversation. We really cover a lot of territory. It gets philosophical. We talk about art. We talk about politics. We talk about representation. We talk about psychedelics. It's all in there. And I think you will enjoy this. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with comic book artist, comic book guy, Daniel Moeller. Well, I'm excited to welcome on to the Entheogenic Evolution podcast today, cartoonist, comic book writer, a graphic novel writer. We'll talk about what those different terminologies mean. Daniel Moeller, welcome to the show.
Hey, Martin. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So you reached out because you were working on a new comic book, and I think you have like a crowd raiser, a fundraiser going on, and so we're going to be talking about that. But let's just start talking about your comics and your background and your interest that you have a psychonautic comic book. I believe that is the name. I closed the window on your webpage because we're having transmission issues. So I had it just moments ago, but it's gone now. But yeah, just tell us about it. And then I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions.
Sure. Yeah. So my studio name is Psychonaut Comics, and I'm doing a crowdfunder to release issue number 5 of 2 different comic series that I have under that banner that I'm just putting out at the same time because I finished them right around the same time. One of them is called the Simon Myth Chronicles, which is kind of a paranormal X-Files meets John Constantine Hellblazer sort of comic. It's really fun series, and it's got a lot of crazy action and zany things going on. And also, the other series is Psychonaut Presents, and that's an anthology-based series that where the primary storyline really is identifying and recording experiences that I've had in my life. Primarily my experiences with psychedelics in a shamanic ritual setting. Issues 1 through 4 especially detail first an ayahuasca experience that I had, and then the next 3 issues detail an initiatory experience I had, really kind of in undergoing a rites of passage and a training in northern coastal Quirindismo. So the primary medicine that I was working with was San Pedro in that. So seemed to really spark a lot of interest in the independent comics community. I didn't think that it would because it seemed like the niche of the absolute niche. But people really liked it. I do it in a sort of Robert Crumb underground style, not in any sort of gaudy way, but just very expressive, kind of cartoony, and I really don't hold back on anything that's really going on in my psyche as well, or anything that could be embarrassing to me, like vomiting or whatever.
Yeah.
So I just go all out with it, and I'm trying to have a good time, but also relay the just the integrity of the experience as well, because those experiences were very meaningful to me, and I don't want to popularize them in the sense of just making it seem like a fleeting or fun thing that happened. They were definitely life changing. So yeah, it's a fun book.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's just so interesting. I don't think I've ever had a cartoonist or, comic book author on the show before. So I think this is definitely a first. I've never gotten to talk to anybody about this. So what I'd really like to do now that we have a little brief overview of the project, can we go back to your childhood? Let's go back in time. And were you a comic book kid? Is that something that you enjoyed when you were young?
Yeah. Coincidentally, issue 5 of Psychonaut Presents goes back to my childhood to identify some paranormal types of experiences I had that led me to the venue of, the supernatural, spirituality, trying to understand existence. So, yeah, I grew up small Midwestern town in the Ozarks in a very Christianized household, but never feeling quite comfortable within that Christianization. I was very religious in the sense that I was very connected to something other, but I didn't like all the restrictions that traditional religious doctrination, had. So as I got older and went to college, I read a lot. I was very interested in all things liberal arts, of course. My interest in comics was always vital to my childhood because I grew up in a very small town. We didn't have a whole lot of connection with the outside world. This was the 80s, early 80s. So the grocery store rack, the grocery store rack on of comic books and the little pharmacy with the little book stand. Those were my only two connections to anything other than what I had. And I didn't even grow up in town. I grew up out in the country. So I was even isolated, from the town in which I lived. So I didn't really get to hang out with friends much. And I did have a nice forest in the back, which led to a lot of connection with nature. So I would just grab some comics and books and go out and take walks in the forest. And so the idea of any kind of spiritual connection to anything was automatically integrated with the natural world for me. So by the time I got to college and then out of college, I was very interested in pursuing just any form of consciousness expansion. I had experimented, with LSD a lot in college, but I wanted something more meaningful and connection. So yeah, that's essentially it in terms of I just started pursuing and looking, and as you pursue something in the universe, you always seem to turn up something, right? So as long as you just keep at it. But it never was really connected with my comics work or cartooning work. I didn't really pursue that after college at all, and just got married early, had a child early, and needed to find a way to support my family. And I just went right into kind of the capitalist engine of the working world right away, and got trapped in that, in my cartooning and also just my writing, because I write books as well. All of that just sort of got pushed to the side and became more of a hobby than anything else. And the reason why I love my own work in Psychonaut Presents, because it was an exercise for me, and being able to go through those medicine experiences and coming out of it saying, you really need to push forward with this, Daniel. That this is a passion of yours. It feeds your soul. So go for it. Do it. You know, you can keep the day job, and as long as you just keep doing what your passion is, you'll have the energy to be able to do both.
Yeah.
So that really only happened even just what, 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Yeah. So still going back to childhood, I want to ask you some more childhood questions. Um,
Please, please, yeah.
yeah, reading comic books. I think you said back in the '80s. So what kind of things were you reading at that time? What was sort of the ground level of your entry into comic books and that whole world? Because I just think of like superheroes and stuff like that. But you've mentioned like R. Crumb. I know he's kind of like edgy, countercultural, like
Yeah.
cartoons and stuff like that. So yeah, what were you reading? What was inspiring you?
Well, yeah, I mean, the first things I had access to because it was a small town, right? So the only thing they got in the grocery store was X-Men, Spider-Man, Batman, that sort of thing. But it was a moral compass for me, really. It truly helped guide me in the sense that I was very in tune to sticking up for the little guy and doing
Mm.
what was right, fighting for those, even if they don't believe in your existence. So I got a lot from that, but as I got older and was able to drive, there was a city that wasn't too far from where I grew up, Springfield, Missouri. They had comic shops, which was a whole new thing for me. Wow, whole store dedicated to comic books. It was like heaven. And I would go there frequently and yeah, exposed to all sorts of stuff outside of the normal mainstream Marvel DC industry standard. There were things other than superheroes. There were all sorts of independent comics about crime, romance, you name it, that any kind of topic, and it opened my eyes to understanding that comics were really just a medium. They're not a genre. I think they often get mistaken for a genre. When somebody brings up comics or comic books,
Mm.
they either think of something for little kids and or superheroes, and it gets lumped into that. But books for kids or superhero books are just a genre in and of itself. That can be in movies, it can be in cartoons. Comics can really be anything. There are autobiographical comics, there are comics about history, and I particularly like those that are of the nonfiction standard. And I eventually, over the years, ran across a creator, Rick Veitch, who wrote comic books about his dreams. And he has a whole entire series of comics. I think he's up, I think it's a number 30 something right now, where he's just recording his dream time. And it's not just recording his dream time, it is a Jungian analysis of his dreams and tracks how one dream will affect another and how they end up impacting his actual waking life. And it actually won awards by this very prestigious organization that studies dreams. I can't remember what university it's attached to, so I feel bad not knowing that offhand. But that really opened me up to just this medium can do anything. We can use it as a way to analyze as well as to entertain, or report on something. I've also been very attuned to journalists like Ted Rall or Joe Sacco who go their war correspondents that have gone to other countries and reported their experience in a comic book or graphic novel format. So it's a very engaging way of being able to pull somebody in to where you are getting the written word, you're getting something you can't really get via through movie or TV media, but yet you're also getting the visual stimulus as well. So it's a medium that you can't really do it any other way. There's a you to be able to blend, image with text and the depth that comes with text is a very unique thing.
Yeah. So when did you start your own cartooning and drawing?
Well, since I could even begin before I even started writing, I mean, I would just draw pictures and picture books even as a little kid. And before I could even write, I even remember telling my mom, who would write the letters in for me, okay, mom, this character says this and this and this and that and that and that. So I'd always done it. It was always something that I completely felt like was what I was here to do. And
Yeah.
And I even went to art school hoping to be able to explore that passion. But art school was kind of a letdown for me. And I say art school, I went to college and majored in art, and it didn't work for me at all. And it was a rough experience, just not only in the schooling aspect, but just personally, I didn't take it seriously like I should have, and ended up kind of throwing away my experience, I think, and kind of led me to just getting a regular job and leading down that path for several decades until recently.
Yeah. Well,
But
I'm
yeah,
glad.
it's always been a passion.
Yeah, it's great that you've been able to return to that. And it's always interesting when I think it's quite common for people who do have like a central passion in their lives that if they are able to make a living out of it at some point, or really making that the primary area that they're investing their time and energy in, it almost always does trace back to childhood of like really finding like, yeah, I was into this way back then. And so it's great that you've been able to reconnect with that. So with your own artistry, does it does it fit into a particular style, or maybe it's complete to your own style? Like this is coming from not having a lot of exposure to this kind of a material, but I'm kind of imagining that there's like the superhero style, then there's like the anime magna. Am I saying that correctly? Ma,
Manga.
maga. Oh, that's a dangerous word.
No, manga,
Manga,
or
manga.
manga. You can
Okay, there
say
we go.
manga to
Yeah,
not.
yeah. The manga style of like the Japanese animation. Um, yeah. Is there a spectrum? I mean, can you help identify any of that for us? And do you fit somewhere on this spectrum? Or again, as somebody who's not really been into, I don't think I ever bought a comic book. I was into the Tintin. Did you ever read Tintin?
Oh, Tintin is brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
I,
is well noted as being one of those works that every cartoonist looks up to.
Okay. Well, I had all of those as a kid, like
Oh
a
wow!
big stack of all those Tintin comics and books. And I was into,
I'll take the Mafia if you want.
yeah, I don't think I have them anymore. I don't know what happened to them. Honestly, my mom might have them somewhere, maybe. I don't know. She's unloaded a lot of stuff. But I was also into, The Far Side, Garfield, right? Those were my go-tos. Calvin and Hobbes. I love
Yes,
those. I own one graphic novel. I have Interview with a Vampire graphic novel version.
nice.
Big Anne Rice fan. But that's just very limited exposure. I never got into like the superheroes and stuff like that. Though I do enjoy the superhero movies these days, but I never read any of that stuff as a kid. So anyway, back to the question of like styles. Where do you fit within like the overall style, or is it?
Well, definitely not mainstream superhero or manga style in any way, shape, or form. I'm a little rougher. You mentioned like Calvin and Hobbes. We can go like Peanuts, Charles Schultz, like the Sunday comics that you find in the paper. I think I emulated those styles a lot more going into my work. And I think it's because those were the most readily accessible for me as a kid. I mean, my parents always got the paper, right? So I had comics every single day. And so if I was, when you learn to draw, you're aping off of someone's style originally, and you're studying them. And
Yeah.
those were the comics that I originally studied. Bloom County was actually one of the biggest influences. For some reason, I loved
Oh yeah.
Bloom County so much. I don't think I understood it as a kid, but I loved it, and I still have all the Bloom County, collected volumes. But yeah, I studied Burke breezed his work a ton as a kid, and so my style is a lot more like that. It's definitely related to a very underground sort of style, which I think some people could probably even call amateurish, because comic artists really try to go all out nowadays. I mean, we're competing with movies, right? So they're trying to get as big and as cinematic as possible, and also mainstream styles like superhero style or manga style. usually have an assembly line of people doing the work, right? So you have one person doing the pencils, another person doing the letters, another person doing the inks.
Hmm.
So each part of that assembly line is able to give it their all and all that effort, time, and energy into that one piece, and you get a very, you know, pristine piece of work that you can hang up on mom's refrigerator. I focused more on the storytelling aspect, which is what I loved about Sunday comics because in like two or three or four panels, they could tell almost an entire story.
Yeah.
And that was really important to me. I care less about making something look really neat and cool and more about being able to portray a sequential narrative and really grab the audience and pull them from page to page, being invested in the story aspect, not just the art. I still invest time in my art. It's not stick figures by any means. I mean, you can see,
Yeah.
my one of my pieces of artwork behind me, but I do try to make it simple enough and fast enough that it doesn't take forever just to create a single comic book. A lot of indie artists will spend sometimes years just to create one single comic book because they're trying to perfect it to that level that you would see in the mainstream industry. And I'm not really interested in that. I'm interested in putting out as much product as I can. I like to say product over content because to me it's different. I'm very interested in physical, tangible books that people can hold in their hand. So yeah, I don't know if I helped describe that because you mentioned Robert Crumb in the underground scene. The art is usually very edgy, very sketchy, and that particular scene in the '60s and '70s were underground cartoonists and that came out of the hippie movement that just you can relate it to like rock and roll flyer art or stuff like that, just where you can imagine somebody's just in their basement on their floral couch, with cigarettes and pot smoke all around them and just going at it with all the energy that they can, but it might be on a crumpled up napkin and then they hand that in and that becomes the poster or the flyer that somebody. It's that sort of level of energy, and I love that. I love that type of work in the indie underground movement, and there's still a lot of people like that to this day, and that's always the stuff that I gravitate towards 100%.
Yeah. So, of course, the listening audience can't see this, but yeah, you do have a large poster of one of your characters behind a sort of an astronaut character, and it does give me sort of echoes of Crumb with his characters have a lot of swagger, kind of a lot of attitude to them, and that's even though it's just a guy like sitting cross-legged, he's got his hands up. It has sort of that vibe to it for me that it's a little bit edgy, kind of swagger. Like there's a cool element to it, I would say.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah,
That's very flattering. Thank you.
well, it's my uncurated, largely ignorant of the comic book world opinion that I it reminds me of Crumb in that sense.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not all that familiar, but I've seen some of his work, and there's some movies about him that have been quite interesting.
Oh yeah, some really good ones. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what's the medium that you like to work with?
I'm a pen and paper person, so a lot of people work digitally nowadays. I have to work on paper. The inks that I work with are just basic, your basic drawing pens that you can get. I do sometimes will use full on brush inks as well. The only time I really go digital is when I'm like the poster behind me, when I'm trying to do a full on color, thing like with the covers of my books or anything like that. And that's kind of just for sake of timing. And also I'm not great when it comes to color. And I was speaking to someone else earlier today when I was in college. I didn't do very well in painting class, and it was because I can see color and I can identify that as green, that's purple, whatever, but I don't understand volume and I don't understand complementarity and how those things pop from one another or are muted correctly. So when I'm painting with color, whether it's colored pencils or whether it's acrylics or whatever, or pastels, it's kind of all over the place. So digitally, I'm able to kind of get it down fast, and I can show my wife and say, "Hey, does this work? Does it not work?" And she helps me correct course, and then I can kind of fix it, make sure it's what I'm going for, but also it makes sense to anybody who's viewing it. So yeah, but yeah, I I don't really like working digitally though if I don't have to. So when I do color my comics, I usually go for a very simple color palette. They almost have a black and white feel, but I might use one or two colors to kind of carry the scene. So has kind of an abstract, dreamy feel to it for the most part. And a lot of people I find really like that actually. They like a very simple color scheme
Mhm.
because otherwise you have so much going on. I think it can overwhelm the system. And there is a comics historian named Scott McCloud, and for anybody, especially who you say is uncurated in the medium, he's got a great graphic novel out called Understanding Comics. It's a comic book about comics as a theory, as a practice, and as a philosophy. And you would think that sounds boring. It is literally one of the most engaging books I have ever read. He's a genius. And one of the things he talks about in that is people will actually gravitate more towards a simple face that's just drawn as a circle and a couple of lines for like an emoji smiley face than they will a realistic drawing of that person's face. And because it becomes universal in that sense, right? So we can all
Yeah.
tag on to that. We can all understand that's a person smiling. I get that. And not that people won't appreciate the realistic drawing, but in terms of telling a story and in terms of narratively trying to pull a person's consciousness in and take it on that ride, the more simple you can get, the better. And he wrote this before ever we had the concept of emojis, and lo and behold, we have this like language now that I mean, me having kids and so I had to deal with it while they were growing up and everything. This is a language people speak now. I mean, I know people that will just text me sometimes nothing
Right.
in emojis, and I'm still kind of mind boggled in it because I'm getting to be an old man and I don't get that sort of thing. But it makes sense from a cultural perspective too. It's a cultural meme, so to speak. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, it's not quite the same thing, but we've kind of seen this dynamic in animated films where for a time things were getting more and more hyper realistic and trying to make particularly like human characters more and more realistic looking. And then I think it's kind of swinging back the other way of more exaggeration, more comic book style that because then I think it's called the uncanny valley, right? That when you create a human simulacrum that is too human, it
Hmm.
gets a little weird for viewers. And
Yeah.
this is something that people study in robotics, right? That if we don't want to make a robot or an android that looks too much like a human, because then people are like, oh, that creeps me out. So this is where, like, if we see like Japanese robots, they've got the big smiley faces and big eyes or things like that, that they're
Right.
intentionally exaggerated. And so I can see that sort of that same dynamic that you're discussing sort of playing out in these other mediums of that by going with abstraction and exaggeration, it actually makes it more accessible, which might be counterintuitive that we think that the more realistic we make it, the more accessible it is. But it actually doesn't work that way in a lot of situations.
Well, because I think that it again it becomes universal in that sense. We all, I mean, you understand the paradigm of how perception works and how you and I might perceive and understand something in completely different ways because of our, different backgrounds and experiences, and that informs how we're actually viewing something, whether it's an idea or an object. But think of all the different cultures and the way language forms reality in that respect. So it just lends to the idea that there are some times when one person from one culture and one from another just cannot understand each other if they're coming from their own individual spaces. But the
Yeah.
more we abstract something down to its core elements, i.e., simplify it, then we're able to actually like meet in that regard. So I think our brains are are always ready to do that. I think just people aren't always ready to simplify things in that regard.
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned your wife. How did, I'm curious, how did the conversation go with, honey, I think I want to be a professional cartoonist? How did that go?
Uh, well, don't quit your day job, honey. No, my wife is very supportive, and I'm not yet at a point where I can quit my day job. I'm not sure I want to get to that point because I know a lot of cartoonists. I know a lot of cartoonists. I've been in the community, and I know a ton of people that are having to run GoFundMe's and Indiegogos just to get health insurance.
Yeah.
It is a. I'm well aware, and I'm not naive to the fact that when I left college, I wanted to get into publishing and to making books and making comics, and the print media was dying. And so we're in an era where people don't actually absorb that content. Most people don't even read. I can't even tell you, probably of all the conventions I've been to, and I'm talking not only comic books, but also just
Yeah.
the regular books that I sell, where people will walk by my table when I engage with them. They'll just say, I don't read.
Yeah.
And if I'm able to even get a book in their hand, it will just sit on the shelf. And it saddens me completely. It doesn't mean I'm going to stop, because that one person that I might meet that will email me 3 months later and said, "Oh, I read this and I had this idea," that means the world to me. That's more than anything, any money I could make in the industry. That means more. So I'm not really interested in quitting my day job because I am relieved of the pressure of having to support my family. But I have a familial situation, especially with my wife. My kids we're empty nesters now, but even when they were home, everybody always supported my dream. Everybody was, when we in our spare time, we can go to a comic convention, or we're going to go to dad's book signing, or and my wife's always been there to kind of help edit me and support whatever I need in that regard, just as I support her in her endeavors. So yeah, it's all good stuff.
Yeah. That's great. And
Yeah.
yeah, I just want to applaud you for supporting books and like physical objects. That I think it is a very weird era that we're in where everything is digital, and it always it's weird for me, yeah, because I've encountered that as well when people say like, "Oh, I don't read books," and like I'm really happy that I'm able to produce my own audiobooks for my books because a lot of people say like, "Yeah, I won't read it, but do you have an audiobook?" Like, yeah, I've got the audiobook, and so they'll listen to that because people like it on their devices and things like that. But especially with something like a comic book. I mean, there's just that intimacy, or really any book. There's that intimacy of it's me and the book and the world that is opened up within this book, and it's like this little magic portal that's just I just it's so wonderful that it's just like marks on a page, but it's representational, and then it brings us into the imagination. And that, like you mentioned, going out into the woods with your comic books, like what a special experience. And it's something that a lot of young people they don't have that these days. Okay, well, I'm an old guy like all the young people these days, but they don't read books, and they don't do long form content stuff. Like my son, he's really into his YouTube channel right now. It's called Jaden's Outdoor Adventures, and he films all his fishing and all our birding and all our outdoor stuff. And he's made these really good videos, and sometimes they're 15, 20, 30 minutes long, and they get almost no action. And what he's discovered is that you got to make the shorts, and then he'll post a short, and at the end of the day, it has 30,000 views. And so he's like, yeah, this is all I want to do is make shorts. And they're just like 10 seconds long, just like this little blip, like him catching a fish. Like, yeah, that was it. But I love content that I can sit down with and absorb. And I mostly don't collect physical books anymore these days because I read so many books, and it's super convenient just to read them on my iPad. So I do a lot of ebooks. But I don't know if you could see it. Like, okay, we'll turn the camera. Like, there's a bookshelf. Those are real books back there. I've got my own books, and then the people who have been on the podcast, I have a lot of their books, but it's just a sort of this ancient medium that's been around for a long time. And even comic books, in the sense that we can go back to before there were books, essentially there were comics,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
people were representing life through representational drawing and telling stories that way. That it's almost the original tactile medium.
That's how Scott McCloud in that book, Understanding Comics, goes through the history of comics. He goes all the way back to the first cave drawing in France that we know of, um, and then goes through ancient Egypt and whatnot.
Wow.
Language itself developed from a pictorial format. I mean, even if you look at the English letter A, it originally came that the depiction of that particular letter came from the Middle East and was essentially the head of a bull. But it's like upside down now. But it was the pictorial representation of the head of the bull, like the very beginning, the alpha of creation was in ancient Canaan. So that like language develops from that pictorial format. We just don't realize it. When I encounter people that say, "Well, I don't know how to draw," I say that's bullshit. You write. You know how to write. That's literally drawing. It literally is.
Yeah.
And you were trained to be able to draw the letters A, B, and C, and so you can depict those. That's exactly what drawing is. It's actually the exact same faculties operating in the human brain. One cool experience that I did have in college, because it wasn't until my senior year that I finally found my mentor that I should have found from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Just an incredible. His name's Professor Tom Parker, and from Drury University in Springfield, Missouri. And he probably won't mind me throwing his name out there because he's still alive and kicking to this day. 80 years old, like sailing boats and playing in banjo in a band. Just incredible human being. But he started a drawing class, and it was a senior drawing class for me because I waited till later for some reason. It was a long story. He starts the first day of class and he hands out a book to everyone. It was Zen and the Art of Archery. And he said, "I don't want anybody coming to class until you read this book. If it takes you a week, if it takes you a month, don't bother coming to my class until you've read it fully." I'm like, Zen and the Art of Archery? What are you talking about? And it's an incredible book because it's just all about using the concepts of the Tao and Zen of being able to just hit a target in life, period. To be able to just focus on the bullseye to the point where you become one with the bullseye and there's nothing separating you from it. And that's when you actually hit the target, which is exactly the faculties that he wanted to open up in the brain, because he's dealing with people that grew up thinking, "Oh, I might not be able to draw," or "This is how I draw because I was trained in high school to do this," whatever. He was trying to unravel all that and get it down to the very core concepts of the way the human brain works and the way the human brain can actually focus and execute what it needs to execute. So it was very primal experience for me. And then when I was still having trouble, he just forced me to never use my dominant hand again in the rest of the year. He
Oh,
forced me to draw from the left hand, and that rewired everything for me.
really?
Yeah, it was incredible.
Wow, wow. So that was a question I was going to ask you, if you're predominantly left or right-handed and what you like to use, because I'm I'm split. I'm half left-handed, I'm half right-handed, but I do write and draw with my left hand. So
Mhm.
I encounter the problem of like when I try and color, my hand smears and then I get all the color on my hand. Did you experience that in having to use your left hand or?
A little bit at first, but I came very quick to be able to figure it out because I was after reading that book and really kind of meditating on what I was supposed to be doing with his coaching. I was able to understand what I really needed to do in order to solve the problem, and it garnered a whole other level of focus and attention to how I was actually holding my hand, how I was actually maneuvering my entire arm and body, and how my body was in relationship with the piece of with the paper, even with the canvas or whatnot. So Yeah, there were some stumbles a little bit at first, but I mean, I was going at it every single day for, a week or so, and within a week I was getting it down. Not that my drawing looked similarly. I mean, you can definitely tell my work from my right hand to my left hand, but my left hand ended up the work was way looser,
Mm,
way more fluid, and help me kind of open up those particular capacities and in my brain to be able to kind of break down the rigidness that had come from years of conditioning
right.
on my right side, on my dominant side. So it was cool. Yeah, it was. I really appreciated the experience.
Yeah. So now, do you still predominantly use your right? Do you ever just like, I'm gonna do a left-handed comic this time, or I'm gonna do a right-handed. And I'm glad we don't have video available because I just used the wrong hands as I was trying to demonstrate left and right hands.
Well, I can't tell because it's mirrored for me.
Yeah.
But so I primarily will use my right hand, but there will be times when I just don't want to like get at that certain angle. I will use my left hand
Oh,
for something. I've not really approached tackling like an entire book with my left hand, although I'm not opposed to that. A good idea, Martin. I'll call it the Martin Ball book.
all right, cool. Well, and then not only could you sell it at a comic book guy's shop in The Simpsons, but you could also go to Flanders Leftorium.
Right.
Hit all the markets.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So going back into entering into the comic world professionally, and it's still not your day job, but like you mentioned, lots of people who are doing this full time, that it's a hard road, that they're not making a lot of money, and so it's a question of how do you survive. What was that like entering into that world, moving from being an enjoyer of these products to now, oh, I'm actually entering into this world. I'm becoming one of them. How was that for you?
A little nerve-wracking because I'm kind of just a natural fanboy. Um, so start getting to the point where I was starting to interact with people I considered heroes growing up, was very, very nerve-wracking. Um, and also I mean, I think most artists are this way, but very insecure. I'm not necessarily introverted, but definitely I never really thought that highly of my work. But I kind of came into the indie comics industry, especially at a very zeitgeist moment. It was right around when the pandemic was happening, and it seemed to do something for a lot of indie creators where everybody started getting on these Zoom calls together, drawing together, and then creating stuff together, creating magazines and anthologies of, let's utilize this time wisely and let's push through this mess by bringing something cool and beautiful into the world. And it was a very, very uplifting time in terms of that community. So where the world felt like it was kind of falling apart, we were raising ourselves and each other, and it was a really cool time. So I was a little skittish at first getting into it, but as I started getting into the swing of things, it was actually very magical. So yeah, but I did learn that in order to be in the industry, in order to be a comic creator, you don't necessarily have to be involved with a specific publisher. Since I had been an observer going into being a creator, I had discovered that publishing houses actually are not where it's at. The industry is changing so rapidly. And by I mean industry, I don't just mean comics, I mean just publishing in general. And so the idea of print on demand publishing, self publishing, with things that like, I don't encourage large mainstream venues like Amazon, but Amazon actually did kind of help generate an ease with which people who are authors or creators can easily just get work out there and then create a community around that. And then, most of the time, the last time I was published by an actual publishing house, they didn't really do anything for promoting my work at
Yeah.
all. So I had to, and I was already in a community of comics people who they know we have to do all the promotion. You have to be your own publicist. You have to, sometimes now you have to even be your own distributor because the primary distributing house within the comics industry just this past year completely collapsed. And so everybody's trying to figure out what's this new world look like. We don't know, but there are different groups that are trying different things. And again, community is a very strong foundational word that people are trying to lean on. How do we generate, these pockets of people where we can, share responsibility together? We can have someone who, works as distribution while another person works in promotion, and we can support each other in that way. So it's a really interesting time, mostly because I don't think anybody knows where this is going to go.
Yeah.
But the comics industry certainly isn't dead. It's just unrecognizable to what it was 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. All right. Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's go back to talking about psychedelics and psychedelic experiences. And let's go back to even cave paintings. So this is an area that I know a lot of archaeologists and anthropologists. It's now fairly uniformly agreed upon that earliest cave paintings and things like that, at the very least, are depictions of altered states of consciousness. And so then there's a lot of reasonable speculation that probably that involved some kind of psychedelic ingestion, or at least some kind of ritual, perhaps fasting, seclusion in the dark, things like that. And so we can see in what's painted on those walls that a lot of it comes out of this, we could call it the imaginal realm, right? And this is an interesting function of the human imagination that, particularly as it gets amplified when we consume psychedelics, that we see representational stuff that there, and it's interesting because not everyone does. I mean, some people, there seems to be a spectrum where some people are highly prone to lots of visual content, and other people can even take very high doses of a psychedelic that I would normally assume like, oh yeah, this hyper visual, and people say, no, I don't see anything. Like for me, mushrooms are very, very visual. Once I get into like the higher dose ranges, I can just, I could just look out at the world and there's tons of shit going on, and close your eyes, and then like there's a whole universe of stuff going on in there.
yeah.
And I've seen statues and temples and cartoons and space stations, and aliens and weird insect people and all kinds of stuff, which for me lends itself to translation into the visual medium. Like, this is interesting stuff. And even it's my theory is also that like this is where architecture comes from, is from these visionary states of like, that's a really fucking cool temple. How do I build that? That I think that that's where the inspiration, where a lot of this comes from. And of course, in cultures that have an integrated use of psychedelics, we tend to see very particular visual mediums produced within those cultures. So like the representation of ayahuasca icaros into South American art, or the peyote artwork of the huichol, or Mesoamerican motifs. Like for me, this is something that usually when I take mushrooms at some point, I'm going to see stuff that visually looks like it could come out of Maya or Aztec culture, both cultures that used mushrooms, or I see a lot of stuff that looks like Celtic knots. And there's Liberty Cap mushrooms in the in Ireland, and so I know some people, their interpretation is, oh, where you're seeing those cultures, or you're visiting those cultures, or that's something from a past life. Versus my interpretation is, no, I'm taking mushrooms, and these people took mushrooms, and I'm seeing the same kind of stuff that they saw, and they just represented it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, for your own experience with psychedelics, have you found that has been an inspiration for not just the experience of taking a psychedelic, but actually the visionary content? Like you mentioned that it's kind of autobiographical for the material that you've used. So how much of that is representational? How much of that is sort of the dynamics of taking the psychedelic?
Oh, it's interesting that you put it that way because some of the elements that I have tried to represent might also be not necessarily something that I visually experienced, but as you know, I'm sure in communing with some of these substances, there's a whole other experiential thing going on. And I'm just trying to depict it, right? I'm just trying to, whether it's a feeling or
Yeah.
nuance, I can't even say feeling because it's not even that. And so trying to relay like the entire depth of the world. But again, it's a futile effort because I'm putting it on a two-dimensional page, you know.
Yeah.
But the experiences that I recount in the comic are, they both start out because there's two main experiences, and they both start out kind of, I would say, mainlining the actual ritual physical experience that I had working with the actual ayahuasquero or working with the curandero when I was working with San Pedro. So you can feel the outline of the actual ritual itself within the waking world, but then augmenting that by all of this other phenomenon and, you know, experiences that are happening seemingly outside, but mostly like within,
Yeah.
inside of me. But sometimes that could get completely cartoonish. Like in my first issue of Psychonaut Presents, which is subtitled Mother Vine, that's primarily my ayahuasca experience, is that first issue. And the ayahuasquero turns into a little gnome at one point floating around above my head. He didn't really do that, but I remember during the experience just while there was a moment he was working with me, I was like, you're a fucking gnome. Like,
Yeah.
you're just this like little impish guy who's just like on top of me. And I didn't know how else to, and it was like a real experience. It wasn't just me like kind of coming up with some kind of funny thought. I was like, wow, that's really, this is who he is. It's not that I saw him walking around like a little gnome with a hat on his head, like David the Gnome, but just, it was this other dimensional experience that was happening. I didn't know how else to depict it, but just turn it into a little cartoon
Yeah.
version of himself. But so yeah, that is the sad thing, is that there's so much about the psychedelic experience that you can't depict in a 2D dimensional way. I mean, you know, Alex Gray and others and numerous people that have created these incredible pieces of visionary work. There's all sorts of wonderful visionary artists out there. But we are still lacking that other dimensional aspect of it, which I think music, you know, I actually remember when I was first experimenting back in the day with salvia, I was using some of your music.
Mm.
This was back in the MySpace days
Yeah.
to help carry that experience for me. And it was actually very helpful. So I think music is another really good element that we could add that other dimensional piece to it, you know, with the visual aspect. But I still feel like that you still can't fully experience it unless you're just fully experiencing it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I like that distinct that you make with music. I think for me, one of the primary reasons why music can be so representational and really capture the entheogenic experience or psychedelic experience is because it moves versus if we've created a static piece of art, it's not moving. And that for me, music is always interactive, that as music shifts, your feeling shifts and your perception shifts. And that's such a fundamental part of the psychedelic experience because it is
Yeah.
never, ever, ever static. It is
Yeah.
always moving. But as soon as we create something representational that is static, it's like it only catches a little slice and that it doesn't necessarily have like looking at the piece behind you, like if the colors of that energy coming out of that character, if they were to change, then we could feel like what is the emotion like as it gets brighter or it gets darker or sometimes it's just like these little subtle elements where something comes in and all of a sudden something that was maybe benign is like suddenly now it's scary. Like, well, and it was the change and how I like to say that I call it when we're really in, I like to call that the divine imagination. And I also use this phrase of it's your personal interface with this imagination, but it's always immediately responsible or
Mm,
no, responsive, where
mm.
any little change that I have in myself gets reflected in what I'm seeing, and then anything that I'm seeing as that changes, I change. And there's no lag time, so it's this continual evolution and movement of this experience, and so that's where. Yeah, if we have an art form that moves, it's more likely to really capture that energetic and emotional resonance of the experience.
That's why I chose one of the reasons why I chose the comic medium to relay my experiences. Because coming out of my ayahuasca experience, the first thing I did was I made a painting of like one moment of the experience, and I mean, the people that saw it were like, "This is great," but I was just like, "It's not." But it's not doing it for me. It's not. I'm not. I don't. I don't feel like I'm processing the experience at all. And I looked back at my journals, and the way that I journal is kind of visual anyway as well. And I was like, "Well, wait a minute. This almost looks like a thumbnailing schema for a comic."
Yeah,
So, and even though it's not moving per se because it's still a series of static images, but it is a
right.
sequential narrative that after I was done with the comic, I had felt like I had processed the entirety of the experience a heck of a lot more than just that one stagnant painting because there was so much more than just like you said, that one thing. I was able to carry it all the way through anyway.
Yeah. And what I think is really useful within that framework is the telling of the story because even though space and time get warped in our psychedelic experiences, there still is a linear progression. One thing moves to the next, and we go through these different peaks and valleys, and like here's an insight, here's a catharsis, here's a withdrawing, right? And so that there's a movement, and so I can definitely see how telling a story could be much more effective for how you're processing your experience. And storytelling is a basic fundamental feature of human consciousness. And this is where I think we highly differ from other living beings. I don't think they're telling themselves stories, but
Yeah.
we do. It's the human inclination to put it in what happened first, what happened next, what was the outcome, what was the result, how did this impact me, how did this change me, so that story, any kind of storytelling medium, I think is highly effective. Like, I mean, in my novels that I've written, there's always autobiographical material in there. There's my own psychedelic experiences, dreams, different things that have happened to me. And I've found, writing a story is a great way just to organize my thoughts and make sense of my experience. And I've actually recently written a story. It's called The Very Sad Tale of King Dipshit Supreme. I haven't released it because we're living in an increasingly fascist state, and so I'm a little bit apprehensive about releasing it. But for me, it was a powerful way for me to help just grapple with what the fuck is happening in the United States right now.
Yeah.
So storytelling, I'm all for storytelling,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think that could be so much more powerful than working on one piece of work that like, well, this was one snapshot from my psychedelic experience. And entering into the comic book world and creating comics that have psychedelic elements. I mean, it's not completely out of the ordinary. That there's various trippings that happen. Like I'm just thinking of like Black Panther, right? That he's got to drink the flower, whatever that flower is, and enter into the spirit world. So there's some precedent for that.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of magic, right, in the psychedelic world. Whether you want to look at magic as a real thing or figurative or whatever, it's there.
Yeah,
And that sort of element has trickled all through comics history and different creators. One of the most prominent comic creators, Alan Moore, the writer Alan Moore, is responsible for Watchmen, V for Vendetta, From Hell. They become huge, blockbuster movies. He is noted for being a ceremonial magician, and he talks frequently about how his comics work are are actual spells at work. You know, everything you say, everything you draw, everything you write and put out there is part of the craft. It's part of the great work, and he's very mindful about that, and has been very vocal and public about that process. And there are many comic creators that have kind of followed suit into that paradigm of like, yeah, man, let's like this is like we're working magicians, you know. Not everybody in the mainstream, of course, is like that, but there are those of us out there that like to ride that current. So, yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like when you kind of entered into this world that you felt like you had support. It wasn't like, oh, dude, you're writing about psychedelics and trippy stuff. Like, well, why are you doing that? But it was more like, okay, yeah, this fits. This is cool.
No, I mean it's definitely the niche of the niche, right? Amongst creators, I've got nothing but amazing support and people totally tapped in immediately to what I'm doing. Like, hell yeah. Now I've had experiences where I'll go to like a comic book convention, and most people who attend comic book conventions, not disparaging anyone, just most people are kind of that attend those are really into pop culture. They're there to see the celebrities or, you know, whatever, and they'll just pass up my booth like nothing. And if I tried to explain it to them, they're just like, I don't understand, man. I just want to go get a Spider-Man comic or whatever, you
Yeah.
know. Like they don't get it, the average person, but it's fine. I don't need to be mainstream. I don't want to be mainstream necessarily. I just want to find my people and the people that are interested in it. So that's cool.
Yeah. So I'm curious in creating these comics, was did this turn into like a coming out moment to your kids, or did they already know that dad was interested in psychedelics and found value and meaning from them, or what was that like?
Well, I think that they had always kind of known because my wife and I are very untraditional. We are involved in many different like First Nations communities in the area. We are involved in groups of people that spiritually are into, you know, shamanic ceremonies or Wicca or whatnot. So, I mean, there's always a room in our house that has like our altars with feathers and bones, and we're very unconventional, and the kids are always just kind of knew that. So I don't think there was any sort of surprise. There was always a conversation of like, you know, don't do drugs, but someday these medicines might be able to help you,
Yeah.
kind of thing. But it's funny because we had always felt weird about, you know, with our kids about it in the sense that we want to raise them in the way of like being able to honor the earth and, you know,
Mm.
help them experience all sorts of ways, but mostly anything that was earth honoring and was specific to conservation and concepts like that. And it's just adorable because, you know, me growing up going to church, I'm like, ah, mom and dad is church, but we would take them to like a ceremony or something and they'd be like, "Oh, it's like church," you know. For them, it was just, it's the same, you know, same kind of pattern, just repeats over time. So, yeah, there was more weirdness with my outer family, right? You know, the family I grew up with or whatever, of just like, what the heck is going on here? And it's really hard to describe
Yeah.
and explain because they just don't understand. But we raised, I mean, I think we raised our kids well, and for me, if they can just kind of see it as just like, oh, okay, cool. It's just another thing. It may not be for me, but they don't disparage, you
Yeah.
know, those odd ways, then I'm good with that.
Yeah. Cool. Um, you mentioned salvia. Are you a fan? Do you enjoy salvia?
I don't enjoy it. I don't know that I enjoy any psychedelic. But it was definitely where, so the reason I really started getting into things very hardcore is I had a traumatic experience that happened a long time ago from after my first marriage and got PTSD. My immune system tanked, and just was not well. So I was looking for ways to get better, mind, body, and spirit. And salvia at that time, this was what this was like the like early tens. I can't remember 2009, 2010, somewhere around that era was legal in Kansas at the time, and there was a local college town not too far from the Kansas City area, Lawrence. If you ever KU is their main college, and they had a shop there that, I mean, they were selling ayahuasca vines even. I mean, it was just at that time a lot of this stuff was under the radar, so they were. And I went in to experiment with salvia there, and there was a period of time where probably about 2 years that I experimented with salvia. Never in a party setting. I don't know how you could do that
Yeah,
in a party
you wouldn't want
setting,
to do
but
that. No, 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 no.
I tried to be as honoring of the experience as possible. And I had about 5 or 6 experiences, every single one of them completely mind blowing. I can't remember the potency level of it, but the final one was probably even though that I had was even more insane than my ayahuasca experience. It was a lot. It was very relatable to how people describe having just pure DMT. And I mean, just completely gone, and it was terrifying. It was actually just absolutely utterly terrifying. And after that, I had to walk away from it because it took a few days for me to even understand what tangible reality was. It
Yeah.
was very jarring, and I even needed to go get help from a therapist to just kind of. And around that time, she was like, "Well, maybe you should look into more Native American or shamanic ways that might help you." And I was like, "Hmm." And within a few months, I local here to the community, I got to know a man who had been trained by a very specific lineage in Peru. And he went there all the time. He went there often, and he was taking very seriously. He wasn't trying to make money off it or anything or any of that. Like he was taking very seriously as his life path, the path of Quirindismo, and worked with San Pedro. And the work that I did with him helped me get back into ease into working with psychedelics again.
Yeah.
And really, one of my most primary experiences is in Psychonaut Presents number 2 through 4. It's kind of a 3-part experience of when he put me through a rite of passage in my training with him. And he's just, I literally this day, I call him my padre. He helped me become a man. It turned me into someone that wasn't acting like a perpetual 13-year-old boy, and learn how to be able to kind of face my fears and just walk in and take control of my life again instead of me being a slave to it. So I owe everything to him in that work.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'm glad you were able to find someone, and that sounded like that was good advice for you to go find someone that actually comes from a lineage and tradition. Because salvia is just, in my opinion, it is the weirdest psychedelic on the planet. It is so strange.
Craziest experiences I've ever had in my life were, well, I mean, there was one experience that I had where I was in a cabin in Wisconsin. And even after I think that the medicine wore off, experiences kept happening overnight, like UFOs, the house shaking and reverberate, like just the craziest stuff where I was just like, oh my gosh, I am in this perpetual dreamscape and I can't get out of it. This is like, it was insane. I mean, but like, yeah, and that final experience I had with it was very intense. To even think about it, my body starts shaking again. It
Yeah.
was it was so intense, but also it was medicine. Like it was something that I I will always be scared of and will never want to experience again. But what I experienced helped teach me about the value of what we have here and now
Yeah.
in this life.
Yeah.
And because of that experience, I don't, even if people talk about previous lives or reincarnation or even any kind of an afterlife, I tend to shrug it off. Not that it's not that I don't believe in it. It's just that experience taught me none of that shit fucking matters. Like none of that matters. If it's something that can help you contextualize something to the here and now, great.
Yeah.
But if it's just an escapist mentality, then the only thing that matters is like your family, your children, your loved one, the people that we have here to hold on to is it. That's it. That's what you get. You get nothing else. And you shouldn't be thinking about anything else because if you are, you're not focused on what you
Right.
have. So
Yeah.
it was a death experience that was something relatable to what I read about when I read through a lot of Buddhist texts of understanding the impermanence of life and embracing the impermanence. Not because from any kind of morbid standpoint, but because there's no future, there's no past, there's just
Yeah.
here, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Pay attention to now. Wow. Well, that's a very powerful message. And thank you for sharing that, Daniel.
I didn't mean to get on a soapbox. I was
No,
just
no, no,
no,
no, no, no.
that was my experience. But yeah, there was some weird shit too.
Yeah, I can tell it really, really impacted you. So I appreciate you sharing that. And, just kind of as a reminder to the listening audience that if you're curious about salvia, it really is weird. It freaks most people out. It's not
Yeah.
something to be taken casually. It's an
No.
incredibly powerful, incredibly strange
No.
psychedelic. So I have a little comic related story around salvia.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
So
Sure,
this
sure.
this was years ago. And I got this email from this guy saying, "Okay, well, I've got my 10 times enhanced leaf salvia, and I'm gonna smoke it tonight. And my intention is to see God." And my response to him was like, "Okay, good luck," because salvia is really, really weird. But good luck, good luck. So then he wrote me another message the next day, and he was so pissed off in his email. He's just like, "God, I smoked this salvia and I really wanted to see God. And all I got was this fractal black and white Betty Boop shaking her cartoon ass in my face, kind of fractaled out to infinity. And that's all that it was. It's just like Betty Boop, like doing her thing." And he was so disappointed. He was so irate. And I just emailed him back and I said, "Well, what makes you think that God isn't Betty Boop?"
Right.
And he's like, "Oh," like his next was like, "Oh my God, I think I missed it. I think I totally missed it." But
Uh,
it just goes to show you, salvia it's a weird one. Weird, 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 weird one.
that is not surprising to me in any way, shape, or form.
No.
That's that's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I never saw any cartoons on salvia, but man, I did a lot of work with salvia. I'm one of these weird people that I have nothing but love and enjoyment from my salvia experiences. That
That's
it's
awesome.
never, even at the weirdest, it never like jarred me or left me like, "Oh my God, that was terrifying." It was always like,
Right.
"That was so weird." Like I really like that. That was so weird because, and I do have kind of a funny sense of humor in that way. It's a little bit dark, a little bit twisted. And so for me, it was just like, "Yeah, this is goofy. I like this."
That's awesome. You're before I even got into it, I read your book, Sage Spirit. I still have it on my shelf in my main bookcase.
Yeah.
It was very, very helpful. So thank you for that.
Ooh, cool. Cool. Yeah. That's
You helped guide my experiences back in the day. So
awesome. Yeah. That's probably my most obscure book. Um,
that
you're
which
the first person who's mentioned it to me in like years.
I usually go for the obscure things, so it works for me.
Cool. Well, I'm glad to have been a part of your salvia experience, and also the moving on from the salvia experience. I'd love to just ask you, as a comic book guy, I'm just curious. Do you have any opinions or any thoughts or feelings about what we've been living through in the past couple decades with sort of the explosion of the superhero genre of this translation of the comic book medium into film and television and really going into this highly visual medium where now, through CGI and all that, like we can do it. Like we can do like really cool superhero stuff. Like if we look at superhero movies now versus like when I was young, like go back to those early Superman movies. Yeah, just the technology has allowed for much more exploration of sort of the superhero and comic book genre. So
Hmm.
yeah, I'm just curious, do you have any thoughts or do you enjoy these films or mediums or
Uh,
what's your take?
so I'm gonna try not to disparage the movies because I appreciate all art. All right, even it can even be corporate art to an extent. And like a lot of the superhero movies, I mean, I my kids were young when they were coming out, and so we have all these experiences in particular. So they're very important and meaningful to me, and
Yeah.
they can be really great. I'm for some reason kind of being taken back to when I was in high school in the like '90s grunge movement, where there was this really garage band style raw sound coming out of just people, just kids, whatever, in flannel because and originally wearing flannel was because well that was just what was in my parents' closet or what my parents could afford at the thrift store. But then that scene and that style became so hyper corporatized
Yeah.
that then suddenly Hot Topic was carrying flannel for $200 or no, and the music too. So that music began to get corporatized to such an extent where there's a certain amount of soul that gets lost, right? Rather than just experiencing what's coming from an artist because that's what they're trying to express. To okay, here is a corporation that has certain metrics and numbers that we're trying to follow. And by God, we're just going to pump out the same kind of script that has the same AI prompts as these movies did before because those were successes. And that's what we're going to create instead. It's not that good stuff doesn't get created still, but there's just the soul that's lost. And I think we've kind of experienced that overall because the top main comic companies, Marvel and DC, that have carried the comic industry since the 60s were bought over by the largest media corporations ever, 20 years ago. So now we have Warner Brothers and Disney, and, everything is kind of coming through those lenses to the extent where even the creators themselves in those industries, we don't have Jack Kirby's anymore. We don't have John Buscema's or George Perez's, all these people that were just incredible artists and writers that were making something, even though they were getting paid next to nothing, but they were making something that was valuable to them. We just, we don't get that anymore. So everything is coming down from this huge multi-billion dollar corporate conglomerate
Yeah.
and guided by that. And so we've lost a little bit of that. And that's just kind of a reflection, I think, of just society as a whole of where we're at, right? And you can look at it in terms of music, art, politics, everything is coming through that lens. Our politics themselves have been kind of co-opted by the multi-billion dollar corporate infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so what do we do? What like so like for me, and this is why I'm kind of choosing to make my comics in this way that I'm making, where I don't really care about going to a publisher and getting on my knees and saying, "Hey, I'm willing to only get paid 5% or less of the work I'm putting into this if I can at least go through you and get wider distribution because numbers, 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 numbers." I'm more interested in soul sharing. And so I'm fine to do this at a grassroots level. And I'm running into people more and more frequently, understanding that that's what we need to be doing in all aspects and venues of life. I know quite a few people in the political circuit. I myself actually am a federal employee right now, going through this furlough, and we're understanding that like we have to do things to take care of each other. We can't rely on that system to take care of us. And that means creating our own economies, creating our own networks, our own social programs. But in order to do that, we need to build community. We have allowed corporatism to divide our communities to the extent where we don't even know who our neighbors are that live next door pretty
Yeah.
much anymore. So we need to start rebuilding that and interconnecting that way, going local, with produce, etc. And so that localization and that getting us back to the extent where we can feel ourselves as a human family, I think is very important. So that was probably a way more highfalutin answer than I think that maybe you were expecting, because if we were just talking about comics in general, but to me, it all makes sense and it's all interconnected for me in that bigger picture.
No, I really appreciate and value the answer that you shared there. And it's kind of this reflection of the nature of outsider art, the nature of community, locality, and then, yeah, the billionaire corporate overlords that we are really living in this billionaire funded social experiment that I don't think it's going well. Uh, I appreciate, like, I watch shows on Apple. I like having music on Apple Music. But I don't like that everything is funneled through just a very few corporations. And then we're making people very, very wealthy. And those wealthy people are supporting basically a fascist program that is not in support of the people, that things are going very much in a direction that I am not supportive of. And it's a
Yeah.
question, like you mentioned, like Amazon, that I've really enjoyed being able to be an independent publisher, be a self-published person, and be able, all my books are available. You can get them paperback, audiobook, ebook, and it's made possible through things like Amazon. But then if I look at Jeff Bezos, it's like, man, I don't like what you're doing, and I don't
Yeah.
necessarily want to give him more money. But that's been my route to reaching an audience and to make these
Yeah.
things available. And then, actually, since we're talking about Jeff Bezos, or I'm talking about Jeff Bezos, I will say, just speaking of superheroes, on Amazon Prime, uh, I do really enjoy what they've been doing with the boys
Yeah.
and Gen V. Like what,
Yeah.
like as I'd always said, like going back to something that you mentioned earlier, it just made me think of sort of the MAGA response to the new Superman. Like, oh, he's like it's this woke thing. It's like, yeah, Superman cares about people. Like that's the character, like helping people in need and people who aren't supported. Like he's like the all American hero, right? I mean, this is what Superman is, but that's been totally undermined in contemporary society, with the dominant political form that we have right now. But anyway, I had always said my opinion is that if people had superpowers, they'd just be a bunch of fucking assholes
Yeah.
because they wouldn't be accountable to anyone. And so when I first saw The Boys on Amazon Prime, I was like, this is what I'm talking about. This is, and like Homelander is one of
Yeah.
my favorite characters of all time, but he's horrible.
Yeah.
He's a horrible, horrible person, and he's pathetic as well. And then when I see like MAGA putting Trump into Homelander's costume, it's like you
You
either,
realize what you're doing? Like,
yeah, you
yeah,
either don't know what you're doing or you really do. And if you do, like, oh my God,
yeah,
why are you doing that? So,
yeah, yeah. It's very emblematic of our current leadership. Like, so, like, you have this unbridled power, and like, look what you're doing with it. And it's just, yeah, it's all around us. It's nuts. To go back to something that you were stating earlier before talking about the boys, I think that that's another reason why. So if people go out to my crowdfunder campaign, they'll see I don't have any kind of digital offering. And I've been told by everyone, you got to offer, yeah, you at least have to give some kind of digital options. And
mm,
I'm putting my foot down on it because somebody else will always own that. I will never own that because Adobe can decide to shut down or to shut me out, and then I don't have access. Or Amazon decides to. Somebody else is going to always own that content, and I've got. I probably shouldn't say this out into the world, but I have some democratic socialist leanings to the extent that I believe we need to own the means of production as workers and as people. We need, like, it's somebody else shouldn't own all of our content.
Yeah.
We should be able to have that content someday. Like, I think we're taking for granted that we're just going to have electricity forever. We're just going to have internet forever. But I mean, look at world history. Like, any day this could shut down, and what are you going to have? What are you going to do? Like, what are you gonna have for recreation? So I'm very on board with having tangible products on
Yeah.
hand, and even in terms of, like, if we don't lose electricity, or everything that we're doing on the internet too is being monitored. Everything is being monitored. So that's why I like to, like, when I'm supporting a local musician, they're like, yeah, you can go download on Bandcamp, but do you have a physical? Give me a CD. I will buy the CD. I want to own these physical
Yeah.
things. I want to have that experience because it's also different. It's different, like you said, just like putting on my iPod and listening to someone, than my wife and I taking some time in the evening to go and put a record on and have that experience of that record. And then you have to go turn it over. You were talking about something that was happening in a psychedelic experience where there's this, like, self-replicating or self-responsive behavior that happens with the other. We kind of lose that with digitalization to a certain extent. We lose the idea of having experienced something with, like, a book
Yeah.
or music. And that's an element I just, man, it I can feel that void. I'm not saying I don't have any digitalization going on in my life, but I can certainly feel that when I lean too far into that, I'm like, well, man, I need to get back into, just pull out the old DVD player
Yeah.
instead, and or whatnot. But because we lose experiences, we become just content absorbers rather than being a part of that experience. And experience means you are in participation with something, not just absorbing something.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it all makes a lot of sense to me, Daniel, and I'm definitely right there
I'm
with
preaching
you.
to the choir, I think.
Yeah. So I've kept you for a while now. This has been a really interesting conversation. I mean, I assumed it was going to be a good conversation going into this, but I think it's been even more interesting and more diverse, and deeper than I could have imagined. So it's been very, very gratifying to have this conversation with you today, that we've got to explore a lot of really interesting topics. And even though we're talking about comics, there's so much real world reference going on here that's I think it's just very meaty. Really enjoy that.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go ahead and let you go. But let's go ahead and let everybody know if they want to support your production of actual physical comics in the world, objects that exist in 3D. How could they do that? And what is that support going to go for? And yeah, let's get into the campaign and how people can support that if they're interested.
Okay. Well, you can go to crowdfunder.com/psychonaut5, and that's the number five, not spelled out, psychonaut5. And you can also go to my website, danielmollerweb.com, and you can get information there. But yeah, I'm celebrating the release of the number five issues of both of those series, but you're not just jumping onto those. So you have the opportunity to either get one or both, one or the other, or both of those number five issues, but you can also go back and get the full library of either series if you want as well. So all of the Simon Myth series, all of the Psychonaut series, and then I have different packages where you can get them all together, or you can get some with a with a commission drawing from me as well. So I've got multiple tiers people can kind of buy into, and they're pretty well described on the crowdfunder campaign. I'm trying to update it regularly with any interviews that I've been a part of, so people can kind of get different perspectives on the entirety of the campaign as well. So yeah, that I ask that people can go out there, at least check it out. Again, you're not funding me making the work. A lot of crowdfunding is you're funding the person making
Yeah.
the work, and then you don't even know if they're going to finish it or not. It's already done. And if you buy into the campaign, Crowdfunder has an option, unlike Kickstarter and some of the other platforms, where you keep it all. So for those that have already contributed, whether I make my end date goal or not, they're going to get their books because I'm going to go ahead and just collect that money regardless, and I'm just going to print those books. So if you contribute, you're already contributing enough money to be able to pay for the printing of those books. The reason why I want to keep going is I want to be able to also generate enough funds eventually to have a large print run of these books so I can start attending more shows in person.
Yeah.
So
have your materials.
conventions and and so I can have materials to be there and be in the shows because printing is really expensive nowadays. So whatever people could do to contribute, you're not just getting those books, but you're also investing me being able to build this creative aspect of my life out more and build more community.
Yeah. So we are recording this on Thursday, November 6th, and this will be coming out shortly on the podcast. So when did the crowdfunding campaign, when did it start and when is it going to end?
It started about a week ago, last Tuesday, and I had a 45-day campaign in place. So it ends on December 12th. And the way Crowdfunder also works is I can end the campaign, but I can still keep the page up and people can still go out and contribute if they want. It's kind of a fun feature of their platform. It's like it doesn't have to end, so if you've got momentum still going, then, go for it. So, but yeah, December 12th.
Cool. Well, I will have links to both your personal webpage and also directly to the crowdfunding campaign in the notes for the podcast. And yeah, this will be coming out on whatever Monday is, Monday the 10th, November 10th. So it's just be a few days from now. So I encourage anybody who's listening to this that, if you want to support like real products in the world and support an independent artist, this is a great way to do it. And hopefully you've been inspired by all that we've talked about here in the conversation today, that like, yeah, Daniel's a cool guy. I like what he's got going on and I want to support that. So hopefully this will get, at least a little bit of action your way. That's my hope.
Thanks. I really appreciate it, man.
All right, Daniel. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for contacting me. I'm really glad that you did so that we could have this conversation and get a little bit of a blast from the past with MySpace and Salvia and the good old days. And I just wish you all the best with this project and with your ongoing comic creation and, keep it cool, man.
All right. You too. Appreciate it.
All right.